All right, I am back once again, and once again I have a camera and a lens to review, or more specifically this time the camera. I already spoke about the lens in a previous video. This is the Avenon 21mm super wide lens, f2.8. Pretty interesting lens. It's kind of on the rare side. I liked it, but you'll get to see it here in its somewhat natural environment on an actual screw mount camera. Granted, this camera would have been made probably 20 years before this particular lens, but you can also see some extra interesting things, such as the viewfinder here, which came with it. This is a massive viewfinder. That is the biggest viewfinder I've ever seen by a significant margin. And I know right here you might not be able to really easily tell. It's kind of squeezed into the frame, but it's a very big viewfinder. It is honestly almost as big as some lenses. It's also pretty broad. It works well though. It's a very sharp viewfinder. It's one of the sharper viewfinders I've ever used, especially for like a third-party style of wide-angle lens. It has some sort of bright lines in it with parallax correction. Unfortunately, they're pressed so far to the sides that it is kind of hard to see them from certain angles, but it is still a very well-built, it's all metal, well-built and just good quality viewfinder. Much in line with the lens, which has nice optics and is very well built. I got the lens with all these accessories right here. I got the whole bag of them this time. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's essentially a whole bunch of different caps. There's a lens hood and the adapter, the screw mount to M mount adapter, which I kind of mentioned, but there's a cap for everything, the forward and rear for both the lens and the viewfinder, as well as an alternate M mount back for the lens when it has the adapter on. I don't know if that was something that originally came with the lens or the adapter, or maybe that was something that was picked up or included by the original owner. I don't know for sure. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm here today to talk more about the camera, which is the Canon 7. And this is a pretty standard model. There's a Canon 7, a Canon 7S, and I think one other one. All of them have a built-in selenium light meter to my knowledge. And surprisingly, with this particular model, it actually worked. I can't say it's 100% accurate, but it is actually accurate enough to use in most case scenarios. And I was kind of surprised by that, because it's not unheard of for those types of meters to still work, but it is pretty rare as you're getting up there in the years. I looked it up online though, and apparently you can kind of open them up and clean them and apply some sort of like metallic solution on them, and it can actually bring them, a lot of them, back to life. Probably not all of them, but a lot of them. So I was actually kind of interested to know that. I'd never realized that before. The light meter, I'm sure back in its day, was very revolutionary, but like I said, I don't think most of them are going to work nowadays, but if they do, it has an interesting feature where you have sort of an orange and a white range, which is sort of indoor and outdoor, and you change it by pushing this button. Now actually just turning this little knob right here, and you can kind of see it goes from black to orange, and you can't really tell very well, but that's what's happening there. And one of them is a day mode. I want to say the orange is day mode and the black is more of an indoor mode. So it kind of changes the tolerance of the meter, so it meters more accurately. The viewfinder is a very nice viewfinder. It has parallax corrected frame lines that light up one by one, similar to a Leica. Almost all of them are individual frame lines. You start out with 35. You do have to manually change them there. There's 35, 50. The next one is 80 and 100mm, and the last one, of course, is 135. Not too surprising. The only ones I didn't really like is the combo of the 85 and 100. I'm not exactly sure why they did this. I feel like those two frame lines are very close together, so they're kind of cluttered in the actual viewfinder. I wish they had they'd kind of paired them up differently and maybe done something like a 35, 100 or something to that nature. Again, I don't know why they did that. I guess they were just trying to go with a Leica-esque trend, and I don't know, I think there would have been better ways for them to do it, but then again, I didn't design this camera, and at this point I don't think it's really worth arguing about too much. But all in all, the viewfinder is very nice. It's bright, it's pretty wide. The 35 frame lines work pretty well. They are a tad bit faded on this particular camera, but they're still usable. You can just kind of see on the far left. A lot of times when I look through it, they're a little hard to see, but if I move my eye around, they get a little bit easier to see. So I think it's just kind of the nature of how they're on there. Usually there's some sort of mirror in here that's silvered, and I think in some cases they actually have gold on them, and that's kind of what generates the frame lines in the viewfinder. So I imagine that's just kind of come off or corroded over the years. I didn't think gold and silver really corroded, but I don't know exactly how it works. Maybe the mirror has some sort of damage. You can't see, there's a tiny bit of fungus in the light meter, so there might be some sort of fungus or something in the camera just kind of blocking it up. Haven't opened it up to really find out. But there are titanium shutters on this camera, which is pretty interesting. Canons often get kind of a rap as being like the cheap poor man's rangefinder, and I know a lot of them, for some reason, the finish isn't great, and you'll see there's actual like rust or corrosion on the outside. It's pretty common. I think that's one reason you see so many companies in like Hong Kong and China that repaint old Canon Ps and Canon 7s and L1, 2s, and 3s and all the 4s and 5s and just whatever camera that's out there. One thing about this camera that I noticed after I bought it, which if I'd known this when I bought it, I might not have bought it, is that it doesn't have any sort of built-in shoe for anything. And you could say, well, you know, that makes sense, because back in the day, people were usually mounting an external viewfinder, and most of your various lenses are covered by the finder in the camera. Or you'd mount a light meter, but oh, you got a light meter in there, so you don't need one. And obviously you don't have a lot of space to mount one. So when I had this giant super wide angle lens that's, you know, kind of comically too big for this camera, I had to go out and buy this separate bracket here. This actually is a Canon made bracket, and it has sort of a PC flash port, and you could just mount a flash on here. That's specifically what it was meant for, is flashes, but since it did have a standard shoe, I was able to put this wide angle finder on here. And again, I don't think this is a problem that's going to really affect most people, just me and the weird setup I have here, but I had to go out and spend almost as much money on this stupid little bracket as I did on the camera itself, which is kind of mind-blowing in a way and kind of frustrating, but at the same time, they did make a lot of these cameras, and I don't think these viewfinders were all that common. It's interesting to note there's two models. There's this one right here that just kind of hangs off the edge and is kind of small and low profile, and one that's much longer and goes over the top of the camera, and it has a sort of a mounting in the middle, more or less where you'd expect it, but it kind of partly obscures the actual meter, and I believe it also kind of partly obscured the little selector for the frame lines, which I could see in some ways that being more of a standard configuration, but since it blocks so much stuff, I can't really imagine that would have been a very popular accessory. So that's why I went with this one, which I think these are actually a little bit more expensive. They seem to be rarer, but I did get my hands on one. It holds on there pretty well. It does move just a tiny bit, but not that much. It's very easy. If you want to take it, you can just kind of unscrew it. It pops right off, and if you line it up right, it goes on pretty easily. Well, it did before when I had it. Not the best setup I got right here, standing behind the camera, but I can, if you hold it on, you definitely can screw it on. So it takes a little effort to take that and put it on. It's pretty easy to take off, but getting it on takes a little concentration, I guess. So not something you necessarily want to pull on and off, which again is a frustration because you have your rewind knob right there. So I don't think you can really rewind it without taking off the little bracket. Again, I know these things are not really a problem to most people. These are really just problems to me since I have this odd setup. And I did honestly kind of buy this camera just to shoot this lens, or predominantly for it. I wouldn't mind having a couple other lenses, but that's down the road. That'll come later. All in all, I have to say it's a nice camera. I was really surprised by the fact that the light meter worked and actually seemed to be pretty accurate. The shutter speeds seem fairly accurate. I haven't really put them through the complete rigmarole yet, but they seem pretty accurate. It sounds nice. The shutter's in great condition. A lot of times you see those old shutters made out of the titanium foil that have really bad crinkles on them, but this one held up quite well. It did have a little streak of oil on it, but I was able to kind of rub that off. Hopefully that's not a sign of things to come. But so far it seems to have held up very well. One thing I did notice is actually loading the film. I loaded a roll and went out and shot it, and then came back and realized that it hadn't fed through. So I reloaded the film. It took some effort to really get it in the actual feed-up spool, which is something I've encountered a lot when I find new cameras. It's not that rare for me to put a spool in, or a roll of film in, for it to not be loaded into the spool correctly and to not feed through. I had it happen once or twice with the old Leica 3 I had. It happened to me once somehow in the Nikon FM2. I don't even really know how. And then I think when I had the Voigtlander Vitesse, it happened at least once on that camera. And I feel like there might have been, maybe even once on a Nikon Rangefinder. I can't quite remember, but I feel like there might have been at least once, maybe twice, on some other camera. So it happens every once in a while. So I have film in there right now. That's kind of why I'm not opening it up. There's probably, what, a roll, just a couple of shots into a roll, I think. But just something interesting to note, that it did seem like it was a little bit harder to load than you might expect from some cameras, but at the same time, as I mentioned, I often have trouble loading a camera for the first time, so I don't know. It did seem like this one took a little bit more effort. Just getting the film in and feeding it correctly was kind of difficult. I actually had a similar issue with the Alpa too, now that I think about it, where just the take-up spool usually have sort of little teeth on them, but there weren't teeth on it. It was a little harder to just make sure it was in there. You kind of had to actually like put the film in and then make sure it was kind of feeding through, then carefully pull out the film and put it in the little receiving chamber. And I don't know, that's just odd. I don't really like that. I don't think it's that uncommon for older cameras, but I find it kind of frustrating. I feel like it wastes a lot of film doing that. Again, that's probably something that's kind of specific to me and the way I like to shoot. I like to try and load film in the dark and expand it from the take-up spool into the little storage area, so it gives you a bonus frame or two. And I know that's kind of a silly thing. People say, oh, well, they're going to get destroyed at the lab anyways, but I develop a lot of my own film, so that doesn't generally matter. But yeah, maybe not the best thing to do in certain cases. All in all, I think the camera's really nice. The rangefinder patch is bright. The viewfinder's really bright. The frame lines are all pretty nice. Like I said, the 35 had a little bit of erosion, I guess, at the far side, but it was still quite usable. The film advance lever is really nice. It looks very minimalistic and kind of primitive, but I just found it works really well. It's a solid piece of metal, and it just it advances really nice and smooth. It's very nice. It doesn't have any like ridges or some crazy hook back. You don't have to throw it forward really far like a lot of the old cameras. It's just a perfect balance in minimalism and just effectiveness, and I really like that. You have the rewind right here, not unlike a Nikon where it's a kind of a collar built around the shutter. You actually have a standard screw mount right here, so you can use sort of a cable release. That's an interesting feature that's on most cameras, but suspiciously absent from pretty much all the Nikon rangefinders. And it's one of those things that people never really talk about, but I notice it because I use those a lot, and every once in a while I want to mount them on a tripod and put a little a remote or something in there and kind of use that to balance them and do long exposures, and I can't because they don't have that standardized feed. They have some sort of weird collar thing that goes around the outside, and you have to use these very specialized release cables. I don't know why they went with that. It's very unique to Nikon. I think maybe one other company used something kind of similar. I guess maybe some of the very early Leica screw mounts used something kind of similar, but I feel it is kind of strange. They stayed with that for a while, and most companies adopted this more standardized thread. So all in all, I'm liking this camera. I'd like to get some more standard lenses to test with it. I'd like to get a 35 of some type and maybe a 50. I don't think I'd go much beyond that at this point because this is just kind of an interesting little camera I bought more to house this particular lens, which you know, shows where I am in life, I guess. But all in all, it's a nice camera, and I think the combination of this camera and lens work reasonably well. I would like it if you had some sort of built-in shoe mount, but given the fact that there's so much up here, I can see that that probably wasn't reasonable. I guess in reality, if I'd done more research, I probably should have gone with something like a Canon P, or maybe like a Canon, maybe some sort of L series Canon. I always kind of like those. But strangely, those cameras usually cost around the $200 to $300 range, and a lot of these Canon 7s, these standard models especially, can be picked up online for anywhere from about, from what I saw, about $98 to $170. That's pretty common, and a lot of them look to be in very good condition and claim to be in proper working order. And like I said with this one, the rangefinder seems very accurate, the shutter seems to work, even the light meter works. So it's an interesting type of camera, and given how cheap they are, I would strongly suggest picking one up. I don't think they're going to stay that cheap forever. I could be mistaken. You know, there's a lot of cameras out there, like Leicas have skyrocketed in price over the last 2 or 3 years. The Mamiya 7 has gone up immensely, but a lot of these Canons seem to have stayed at a pretty stable price range. It's kind of hard to say. I think the Canon Ps have gone up a little bit, and a few of the lenses, especially the really fast 50s, have gone up a little bit, but on the whole, they've stayed pretty stable in price. So you could probably pick one of these cameras up for a little over $100. For the lens, it's a little harder to say. I think most of those are a little bit more expensive, but the bright side is they use screw mount lenses, and there's a vast number of lenses. You have these Avanon made lenses. Granted, there's only 2 or 3 models, but those are all screw mount. You have all the Canon lenses. You have a lot of generic Japanese manufacturers, early Nikon lenses, early Leica lenses, a lot of lenses made in the Soviet Union, and I know a lot of people will scoff at those lenses and say, ah, they're kind of terrible, and yeah, they're not the best, but they're usually very cheap. So if you're looking for a cheap setup, something like a Canon 7 and some sort of Industar lens, like usually there's something like a 50. They're almost always like a 52 or 55 millimeter, and they're usually kind of slow, like f2.8 or 3.5. But those lenses can be had for like $40 a lot of times. So you could reasonably get a nice camera and a usable lens for less than $200. Again, a lot of that kind of just counts. Oh, my lens is rolling away here. A lot of that takes into account luck, just the ability to find a good eBay auction or a good trustworthy seller on a site, which doesn't always happen. But I feel like it's not impossible. If you know what you're looking for and you're just patient, you can almost always find what you're looking for, and a lot of times you can find it cheaper than you ever expected. That happened to me with some of the Nikon gear. It happened with the FM2T. I'd seen that camera and I thought, oh, I'll never be able to find one, but I found one that was a bit worn for like half the going price. Similar with like the Nikon S, I found that at a little, what was it, sort of a flea market thing, and yeah, it was kind of broken, but I knew I could get it fixed, and it had a nice lens on it, so I bought it for like 40 bucks, got it fixed. Even with the repairs, I think I'm still kind of ahead on that whole setup. So something to consider. If you can find one of these cameras, they seem to generally be in pretty decent shape from what I've seen. You can get a cheap lens, you can get a huge variety of lenses, so I would strongly suggest buying a Canon 7, because if you're into film photography, I just can't really see it going wrong, and I kind of regret not buying one of these a long time ago, because you know, just the price is right in my mind, and you just have so many lens options. I feel like screw mount lenses are something I've dramatically overlooked in my camera collecting, and granted, I try not to collect too much and be too much of a hoarder, so in some ways that might be a good thing, but there's a lot of lenses that you can fit on this camera, and a lot of them are very good, and some of them aren't that great, but they can be very cheap, so you have a lot of options. And if you're looking to start off in film photography, this might be the perfect camera for you. Granted, there are other cameras that are definitely better, but they're usually going to cost a lot more money, and you'll often have a much more limited selection of lenses to choose from. So I would definitely say pick up a Canon 7. I really don't think you'll regret it. I don't really think you can go wrong with it, and there's very few cameras you can say that about. So just take that into consideration, and you know, maybe look at prices and see how much they're going for. So hopefully you learned something for this video, and it wasn't just me ranting about my weird collection of stuff. So hope you enjoyed it, and tune in next time.